I think it's really important to think with things instead of thinking with thoughts, because other thoughts are difficult to verify because they're always on the move, shifty, uncertain, merely possible rather than concretely actual. And so things being concretely actual are better to think with because, they afford us with certain conceptual moves. Things, rocks, for example, I love to think with rocks. Rocks as things afford certain movements for me, like as I follow some stepping stones across the river maybe, or as I navigate through the current of the water through the rocks. I'm thinking with things, I'm thinking with rocks, and it makes me ask questions like observing the river, the role that rock and wind and water plays to shape this environment, the roles that they each play. And, I'm thinking with things, but things not merely as inert objects, things as beings, things as in some way ensouled. And I'm a panpsychist, so when I think with rocks, I'm thinking with other forms of soul or modes of soul. Rocks are conscious in some way, not like humans. Humans are conscious in a different way. And, we can think with plants. I do a lot of that in my dissertation. We can think with stars and planets, it's astronomy and astrology and cosmology. We can think with all sorts of things. When we think only with thoughts, though, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Indeed, we need to be able to reflect on our own reflections, to critique our own conceptual apparatus in light of the evidence of things. So the point is not to not think about thoughts and do metaphysics. It's just always be in relationship to the actual processes of the physical world. And by physical, I don't just mean material particles in mathematically predictable motion. By physics, by physical process, I mean what the Greeks meant, by physis. It's probably not how you pronounce it, but forgive me, I'm merely a stupid American. This original Greek sense of the physical had life in it. It had growth in it. It had, it was a form of expression rather than just motion. There was an interior aspect to things. And it's hard to deny this, I think, as just human beings when we interact with the river, that it's a living being. And that it has, the modern liberal political tradition would call it rights. The river has rights, right? It has a right to exist. It has a right to flow, to do its thing. It has a right to do its thing, and we shouldn't dam it up. We shouldn't interfere with the rights of the river. But the thing is, with this liberal way of conceiving of it, it's like we imagine the river owns itself. In the way that, Locke imagined the liberal subject owns itself and owns its own labor. Because if Locke is right and each individual owns its own labor, then capitalism is a crime, because it's stealing the true value of each individual's labor from them by creating a surplus as a result of the labor and the production of workers. And so there's a theft taking place, right, if Locke is right. But rather than imposing this liberal conception of subjectivity upon nature and saying the river has rights, I think I would rather say that the river is due something. It's due something not in the sense of being owed money, due something in the sense of we are responsible to it. It has a The river reaches inside of each of us and calls us to respond to its presence, not just in a physical way or hydrological way, but in a spiritual way. The river calls forth a certain moral response from human beings. I mean, what would human thought be without the image, the metaphor, the meaning of a river, right? So when we think with rocks and water and air, when we think geologically, think with the earth, I think we're doing philosophy in a more artful way. You know, we're trying to become with nature rather than impose a mechanical, engineering schematic upon nature, to impose a plan, to manifest a destiny upon something we thought we deemed merely wild, uncivilized, barbaric, right? Rather than thinking of intelligence as something wielded by man to conquer nature, to master nature, to enslave nature in order to serve our human freedom. Rather than that conception of what knowledge is, maybe we can think with things differently, in relationship with things rather than above things. Because humans, we are one of the things. We are among the things of the world. Not in the same way as everything else. Because humans, as Heidegger would point out, seem to have an opening. They seem to hear the call of being as such, not a particular being in the world, but rather the being of the world itself, which is not just another being like other beings. It's a being with a difference. And humans seem, uniquely prepared to hear the call of the universal, to feel the care of the universal, to speak in a Heideggerian way about these things. So there is a centrality to the human being that cannot be denied, I think, without falling into self-contradiction, right? If you're not a humanist, if you reject the idea of like a universal humanity, then because you think it's violent or you think it's oppressive, unjust, then you're using, ideas like justice that themselves are only possible because you have an awareness of universality. So you're critiquing universality using universality, and so it's a self-contradiction, right? So what is the place of the human? I differ with Heidegger as I understand him. I mean, he's certainly a profound thinker, and I wouldn't want to naively imagine that I have outthought Heidegger, and I've barely thought at all. Because, thinking is ongoing, being is ongoing. It is process, right, as Whitehead would say. So maybe we can, if we're going to think about thoughts, maybe we can think about the thoughts of Heidegger in dialogue with the thoughts of Whitehead, and through their encounter, their collision maybe, something new and important might be born. There's an idea for you. Anyways, 9 minutes of nonsense, or maybe a smidge of wisdom. You decide. Thanks for listening.